Hey there, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, please hit that sub button and join the family. We're so close to 30,000 subs, and you can make that possible. Smash that like button if you enjoyed today's stories.
I don't usually swipe around guys with perfect looking pictures. You know the type: clean jawline, moody sunset shots, smiling with some expensive looking dog. It always screams fake, or this guy is definitely just visiting from Europe and is leaving in 2 days. But Rez was different. His profile wasn't over the top. The photos looked nice, but not so nice that I assumed they were stolen from Google. The captions were funny in that dry, sarcastic way that makes you think someone actually has a personality. I thought, all right, maybe I'll give this one a shot. We matched pretty quickly, which I'll admit gave me a tiny ego boost. He messaged first, which is always a good start, and didn't go with some weird pickup line or hey that leaves you wondering if you should even reply. He started with a joke on my profile picture looking like it belonged on a cereal box, and from there we just kept the conversation going. We chatted on and off for about a week. He had that mix of being interested but not too clingy. He worked in finance, lived about 20 minutes away, and was into hiking, cooking, and what he called trying to win at trivia nights. Honestly, it felt normal, and normal is rare on dating apps. So when he suggested grabbing dinner at this small Mediterranean place he liked, I said yes without overthinking it. The place wasn't some big crowded chain. It was one of those slightly hidden spots that has the same 5 people working every shift, and the kind of lighting that makes everyone look a little better than they actually do. He was already there when I walked in, sitting at the back, waving at me like we were old friends. In person, he looked pretty close to his photos, but maybe a little older and a little less polished. It wasn't a huge difference, just enough that I noticed but decided not to make a big deal about. I figured photos can be weird like that. Lighting, angles, all of that. We started with small talk. He asked about my job, I asked about his, we compared favorite takeout spots, laughed about how bad we both were at parallel parking. He was charming in that easygoing way that makes you relax. We ordered hummus, chicken skewers, and I got a lemonade that came in a glass so big it could double as a fishbowl. Then about halfway through, while I'm still working on my chicken and he's sipping his drink, he just drops it. No warm-up, no lead-in, just says he should probably tell me that the pictures I saw on his profile weren't actually of him. I froze for a second because I thought maybe he meant they were old photos. Like maybe he had a beard before or weighed less. But no, he explained that they were of his brother who, according to him, had passed away a few months ago. And not just that, he said he started using his brother's pictures after the funeral because they got more matches. His exact words were that his own pictures weren't doing well, but his brother's made him look interesting. I just sat there blinking at him, my fork in midair, trying to wrap my head around what I was hearing. He didn't say it in a way that sounded embarrassed or ashamed. It was more like he was talking about switching brands of toothpaste because the old one stopped working for him. He even sort of smiled when he said it, like he thought I'd understand. He told me he hadn't told many people, only me and some other girl who apparently took it the wrong way. That last part made me wonder what the right way to take that kind of confession is supposed to be. The thing is, it wasn't just weird, it was unsettling. I couldn't decide if it was morbid, manipulative, or just completely tone deaf. He acted like it was a compliment to his brother's looks. He even said it felt like carrying on his legacy, which in my head translated to catfishing in the name of grief. I tried steering the conversation to something else, literally anything else, but it just kind of sat there between us, like this big, awkward secret that he had tossed onto the table next to the pita bread. Every time I looked at him, I kept thinking about the fact that he was someone else entirely online. The rest of dinner was slow. He didn't seem to pick up on my discomfort, or maybe he did and just didn't care. He kept talking about his job, about some hiking trip he wanted to take, how he didn't understand why more people didn't like olives. I just nodded along, eating slowly and wondering how soon I could leave without being completely rude. When the bill came, he made a move to pay, but I was quicker. I slipped my card onto the little tray before he could grab it. I didn't want the added weirdness of feeling like I owed him anything. We walked out together, and he asked if I wanted to hang out again sometime. I just said I'd be busy next week, which wasn't even a lie because I had zero plans to ever see him again. Once I got in my car, I just sat there for a second. Not scrolling my phone, not starting the engine, just sitting, processing, It wasn't just that he had lied. People lie on dating apps all the time. It was the casual way he'd admitted it, like I was supposed to think it was clever or even touching. A few days later, he sent me a message, just a short one saying he had fun and wanted to do it again. I didn't respond. Not out of spite, just because there wasn't really anything to say. How do you politely decline seeing someone who used his dead brother's photos to get a date with you? Now, every time I'm scrolling and see someone whose photos look a little too good, I get that thought in the back of my head. I look at the smile, the background, the perfectly lit eyes, and think, you sure they're alive? It's not a question I ever thought I'd have to ask about dating, but here we are. The whole thing started on a Tuesday night when I was half watching some cooking video on my phone and half swiping on Tinder just to pass time. I wasn't looking for anything serious that night. It was more like that lazy kind of swiping you do when you're just curious about who's out there. Then Ania's profile popped up. She had one of those faces that makes you think you've seen her before, even if you haven't. Big smile, messy bun, photos that didn't look over-edited. One was her sitting in the back of a pickup truck holding a watermelon for some reason, and another of her laughing mid-bite at a diner. She looked normal. Normal is rare enough for me to swipe right. We matched instantly. Within a couple of minutes, she sent me a message. Not a boring hey, but something about how my dog looked like he would judge her life choices. I told her my dog does judge everyone's life choices, and from there it was a back and forth that actually felt fun. We kept it light. Music, food, the usual what's your favorite breakfast type of nonsense. By Friday, she suggested we meet up for drinks. I figured why not. We picked a small place downtown that I'd been to once or twice. Kind of low-key, no loud music, good fries. She showed up right on time wearing jeans and a green sweater, looking like someone you'd instantly be comfortable talking to. The first hour was great. We talked about movies, weird childhood stories, and how neither of us really cooks unless it involves pasta or eggs. She was funny and easy to talk to. I started thinking maybe this one could actually turn into something. And then, somewhere in between us ordering another round and me telling a story about my college roommate, she leaned forward and said she had a random question. I thought maybe she was going to ask about my dog again or something harmless. Nope. She wanted to know if I'd be willing to pretend to be her fiance at her sister's wedding. Not sometime in the future or if things work out between us, but literally tomorrow. I actually laughed because I thought she was joking. She didn't laugh. She explained her sister's wedding was happening the next day, and her ex, who apparently is some sort of serial wedding crasher of her family events, was going to be there. She said she'd told her family she was engaged just to stop them from setting her up with random guys. The problem was they now wanted to meet this fiancé at the wedding. And somehow, after one drink with me, she decided I could play the part. I sat there processing. We'd known each other for, 3 hours total. And now she wanted me to meet her entire family, pose for photos, and play along with this elaborate lie like we were in some romantic comedy. She even said I'd get a free dinner and cake out of it, like that would sweeten the deal. I asked her why she didn't just tell her family the truth. She rolled her eyes and said they'd never let her live it down, and that it was easier to just keep the bit going than to admit she made it up. She promised it would be fun and low effort on my part. I just had to smile, hold her hand, and maybe dance once or twice. Oh, and sit at the family table next to her grandma, who, she warned me, likes to grill people about kids. The whole thing felt insane, but she was so casual about it that I almost wondered if this was something she'd done before. I told her I needed to think about it. She said I didn't have much time to decide because she'd need to text her sister my name before the night was over so they could print the little name cards for the reception. When the check came, I was still in this weird daze. She actually asked if I wanted to go suit shopping with her right after our date just to get it over with. Like, straight from our first meeting to buying fake fiancé clothes. I said I had other plans, which I didn't, but it was the easiest way to not get pulled deeper into whatever this was. On the drive home, I kept going back and forth in my head. Part of me was curious about how far she'd actually take the act. The other part of me was picturing myself stuck in some awkward family photo album forever as the guy who pretended to be engaged to a stranger for an afternoon. She texted me later that night with a simple, "So are you in?" I just stared at my phone for a while before typing back, "I don't think I'm the right guy for this." She replied with, "Lol, okay, worth a shot," and that was it. The next day, while I was sitting on my couch in sweatpants, I imagined her at that wedding introducing some other poor guy as her fiancé, maybe feeding him cake while her ex glared from across the room. I half expected her to send me a follow-up text with a picture of her and whatever stand-in she found. She never did. A week later, I unmatched her. Not because she did anything terrible. Honestly, she was one of the more interesting people I've met through the app. But I just didn't feel like being a character in someone else's family drama. Looking back, I think what got me the most was how confidently she asked. Like she didn't even hesitate. She met me, liked me enough to trust me with this bizarre request, and just went for it. No warm-up, no. By the way, I'm about to ask something strange. Just straight into be my fiance tomorrow. And maybe there's a version of me in some alternate reality that said yes, put on a suit and played along. Maybe we even pulled it off and became the weird success story she tells people years from now. But in this reality, I ordered takeout, stayed in, and kept my Saturday free of family interrogations and fake engagement rings. Still, I can't help wondering how that wedding went.
Hey guys, really sorry to interrupt. If you're still listening, then you're enjoying the story so far. And if you are enjoying, then please hit that like button. That's all I ask of you. Thanks so much. Now back to the stories.
I should have known from the way his profile said content creator instead of something normal like teacher or electrician that I was signing up for trouble. But when you're scrolling late at night and your standards get a little flexible, those red flags start looking like carnival lights. His name was Delap, not short for anything, apparently just Delap, and his pictures were a mix of thrift store jackets, coffee shop corners, and one blurry shot of him holding a skateboard. I figured, okay, probably a little artsy, maybe one of those people who collects vintage cameras they never use. Our first few conversations were fine. He liked bad movies, claimed to make weird videos, and said he could cook a mean breakfast burrito. Nothing about it screamed stay away at the time. He suggested meeting for coffee at this tiny place that barely fits 10 people inside. I'd been there before, so I agreed. The day we met, it was overcast and kind of windy. The kind of day where you want to linger inside just to avoid dealing with the weather. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a table with his phone propped up on a little tripod aimed at him. I assumed he was just finishing up a call or maybe taking one of those candid selfies people stage. I ordered a latte, sat down, and we started chatting. At first, he was just as I'd expected, funny in a dry way, wearing this oversized sweater that looked like it had survived multiple owners. He asked a lot of questions, which I figured meant he was actually interested, but the questions started to get oddly specific. Like, not just what's your favorite movie, but what would you do if you caught your neighbor stealing your mail, or how would you handle finding out your best friend hated your cooking? Random scenarios that felt too weird to be casual conversation. About 20 minutes in, I noticed his phone was still sitting on that tripod, still facing him and me. I asked if he was filming something. He smiled like I just caught on to a joke he'd been waiting for me to notice. That's when he said it. He'd been recording our entire conversation. Not for personal keepsakes, but for a YouTube social experiment series he'd been working on. Apparently, the idea was to go on dates, ask people a bunch of unusual questions, and see how they responded. Then he'd edit it into a video with commentary and post it online. He said it so casually, like this was a totally normal thing people did, like telling me he was going to walk his dog later. I just sat there for a second, unsure how to react. My mind was doing that thing where it tries to decide if this is flattering, creepy, or just a total invasion of privacy. He must have picked up on my hesitation because he launched into this whole explanation about how it wasn't about me personally, it was about human reactions, as if that made it fine. I asked him if he'd done this to other people, and of course, he said yes. Dozens, apparently. He even bragged about one date that went viral because the girl stormed out mid-interview. He said that video made him a couple $100 in ad revenue. He seemed proud of it, like it was some kind of badge of honor. Meanwhile, I'm realizing that every single thing I'd said since walking in had been recorded without me knowing. He hadn't asked for permission, hadn't even hinted at it. And he thought the fact that he might blur my face later would make it okay. I tried to tell him that it wasn't cool, but he kept brushing it off with, trust me, you'll come off great, like this was about giving me free PR instead of exploiting a date for content. He even started adjusting his phone angle mid-conversation like we were filming a cooking tutorial together. The more he talked, the more it became clear he saw people less as individuals and more as material stories, clips for engagement. He admitted he didn't even watch most of the videos back for fun. He just dumped the footage into his editing software, picked out the spicy moments, and moved on to the next person. By that point, my coffee was almost gone, and so was my patience. I told him I wasn't comfortable being recorded and I wanted him to delete the footage. He had a half laugh and said he'd consider it. That didn't sit right with me. I told him flat out that if it ended up online, I'd report it. It seemed to annoy him because he started going on about freedom of expression and how he was documenting human interaction. I don't know what kind of documentary he thought he was making, but I didn't want to be a part of it. I stood up, grabbed my bag, and told him I was leaving. As I walked out, he called after me that I was going to regret missing out on being part of something creative. I didn't even look back. Outside, the wind hit me in the face, and I realized I had no idea if he'd actually delete the video. For all I knew, my awkward laugh and half-sarcastic answers were going to be on YouTube next week, sandwiched between prank videos and epic fails. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me. I searched his name and his channel. Sure enough, there he was, posting videos with titles like Awkward First Date with Lawyer and Girl Loses It Over Coffee Question. I scrolled nervously, half expecting to see myself, but I didn't find anything. Either he took me seriously or I was still in the editing queue. The whole thing stuck with me, though. Every time I go for coffee with someone new now, I catch myself glancing around for a tripod. I never thought I'd have to ask a date, "Are you secretly filming this?" But apparently that's the world we live in. Looking back, I think what really got to me wasn't even the recording itself. It was how normal it seemed to him. Like in his mind, filming people without asking was just part of the process. As if personal boundaries were optional when you're chasing views. I matched him that same night and didn't hear from him again. Maybe he moved on to the next person, or maybe he's still editing old footage in some cluttered apartment surrounded by thrift store mugs. Either way, I hope if my face ever does show up on his channel, it's in the middle of me walking out. That would actually be kind of perfect. I wasn't even supposed to be on Tinder that week. I deleted the app for months after a string of bad dates, but my friend convinced me to re-download it just for fun. I figured I'd swipe a little, maybe match with someone interesting, and then probably forget about it again. Megan's profile was one of the first to pop up. She had the kind of pictures that made her seem approachable, hanging out at a picnic, holding iced coffee, and smiling in that effortless way like she wasn't even aware the picture was being taken. We matched in under an hour. She messaged first, asking about the dog in one of my photos. I told her his name and that he basically runs my live. She said she loved dogs but didn't have one because her schedule was chaotic. I didn't think much of it. We messaged back and forth for a couple of days, and she seemed normal, funny, quick to respond, and interested in actually meeting up instead of just chatting forever. We settled on grabbing dinner at a small Mexican place near the center of town. It wasn't fancy, but it had good food and a quiet enough atmosphere that you could actually hear each other talk. When I walked in, she was already seated at a booth waving me over. She looked just like her pictures, maybe even better in person. We ordered tacos and margaritas, and I was feeling like this could actually be one of those rare dates where things just click. The conversation was easy at first. We talked about food, travel, and some random stuff about our hometowns. She mentioned she'd been job hunting recently, which I thought was just casual small talk. But then she got this grin and leaned in like she was about to share a secret. That's when she told me she'd actually applied for a position at the company I work for. I kind of laughed and, oh, what are the chances? But she didn't stop there. She told me she had specifically applied for the HR manager position and that she was really hoping to land it. Still, I thought maybe this was just her making conversation, trying to relate. But then she hit me with the part that made my brain screech to a halt. She said she thought dating me might help her get the job. She didn't even say it like she was joking. She explained how having an inside connection could really boost her chances, and that she figured it couldn't hurt to have me in her corner if she got an interview. She framed it like it was a practical, mutually beneficial thing, like I'd be helping her career and in return she'd, I don't know, keep going out with me. At first, I wasn't sure if I should be flattered or concerned. I asked her if she even knew what I did at the company. She shrugged and said she assumed I had some kind of influence because I'd been there for years. I told her I wasn't in HR, didn't work in management, and had absolutely no say in hiring decisions. She brushed it off, saying that even just knowing someone who worked there could give her an edge. The weirdest part was how comfortable she was telling me all of this. No hesitation, no testing the waters to see how I'd react. She was already brainstorming ways I could casually bring her up to the hiring manager. She even asked if I could find out who else was applying. This was our first date. We hadn't even finished our food yet. I tried to steer the conversation away from my job, but she kept circling back to it. At one point, she asked if I could look over her resume and tweak it so it matched what my company would want. Then she asked if I could get her a tour of the office to get a feel for the place. I told her that wasn't really something we did for applicants, but she just smiled and said, "You'd be surprised what can happen if you ask nicely." The whole thing started feeling less like a date and more like a networking meeting I didn't sign up for. She kept talking about how perfect she was for the role, how much she wanted to work there, and how much she'd appreciate my help. I couldn't tell if she was genuinely interested in me or if I was just her fast pass to an interview. We eventually finished eating and I offered to split the bill. She didn't argue, which I appreciated, but as we were leaving, she reminded me, in the same tone you'd use to remind someone to water your plants, to send her that hiring manager's name when I got the chance. On the drive home, I kept replaying the night in my head. I tried to think if maybe I was overreacting, if maybe she was just being ambitious and I was taking it too seriously. But the more I thought about it, the more it felt like the whole date had been about the job. Sure, she laughed at my jokes and told a few funny stories, but every road led back to her application. The next morning, she texted me thanking me for dinner and asking if I'd had a chance to look into the hiring stuff yet. I hadn't even finished my coffee. I told her I didn't have any pull in the process and that she should just apply like everyone else. She said she already had but wanted me to nudge things along. I didn't respond right away. I needed to think about how to politely step back from whatever this was. Later that day, she sent another message saying she'd love to meet up again and talk more about the company. That sealed it for me. I told her I didn't think we were a match. She didn't take it badly, just sent back, "Fair enough. Good luck with everything." But I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't actually disappointed. It was like she'd already mentally moved on to the next inside connection on her list. Now, whenever I see someone's profile that says, "in between jobs" or "looking for opportunities," I catch myself hesitating. It's not that I think everyone's going to use a date as a career ladder, but once you've been someone's unofficial HR stepping stone, you start looking at first dates a little differently. This one started weird before it even started. Liam messaged me one night saying he liked my smile. Pretty basic opener, nothing special, but he kept the conversation moving enough that I didn't get bored and ghost him. He had that confident but chill energy that can either mean someone's a genuinely nice guy or they're about to drag you into something insane. His pictures didn't set off any alarms. A couple of hiking shots, one of him at a barbecue, another at some wedding where he was dressed up but still pulling a goofy face. I figured he was just a regular guy who probably liked craft beer and owned more than one pair of sneakers. We didn't chat for long before he offered to pick me up for our first date. I hesitated. I usually meet people there just in case things go sideways. But he was friendly, polite, and even sent a picture of his car so I'd recognize it. I agreed. He said he knew a place for good casual dinner, which sounded safe enough. So the night comes. He pulls up in this clean black SUV, gets out to open the door for me, and I'm thinking, wow, one's for old school manners. I get in, buckle up, and we start driving. I ask where we're going, and he says he figured we'd make a quick stop at his parents' house first because his mom made something for us. That's when my brain threw up the first caution sign. Who brings a first date to meet their parents? I thought maybe he meant just stopping by to pick something up like leftovers or dessert. But no, we pull up to this neat little house with a perfectly cut lawn, and there are cars parked out front like there's a party going on. Before I can even ask what's happening, he's out of the car, opening my door again, and telling me his parents are really excited to meet me. Meet me. Excited. I'm still trying to process as we walk up the driveway, and then the front door swings open. His mom is there with this huge smile, holding a tray of bread rolls like she'd been rehearsing this moment. We step inside, and it hits me. This is not just a drop by. There's a table set in the dining room, candles lit, food already steaming and serving dishes. His dad is there too, shaking my hand like I'm some important guest. There's soft music playing, the kind that only ever seems to come out of holiday dinners. I glance at Liam, who's grinning like this is all perfectly normal. We sit down, and before I even get a sip of water, his mom is asking me where I see myself in 5 years, how many kids I want, and when I think about settling down. His dad chimes in with questions about my job, my values, and whether my family is close-knit. That's when it clicks. This is not a casual dinner. This is an evaluation. I'm sitting in the middle of a full-on meet the future in-laws dinner on the very first date. Liam doesn't seem fazed at all. He's just passing me dishes, laughing at my awkward answers, and occasionally jumping in to say how great I am. I try to keep it polite, but inside I'm screaming. I barely know this guy. I don't even know if I like him yet. And here I am, eating roast chicken while his parents look at me like they're deciding if I qualify for some exclusive club. At one point, his mom says she hopes I believe in traditional marriage values, and I just smile weakly and mumble something about keeping an open mind. His dad nods like I've passed some test. Meanwhile, Liam is telling them about our shared interests like we've been dating for months. I keep glancing at the clock, mentally calculating how soon I can leave without being rude. Every time I think we're wrapping up, someone offers more food, pours me more wine, or starts another round of questions. It's like they think if they feed me enough, I'll just agree to marry their son right there at the table. The weirdest part, Liam barely acknowledges how over the top this is. At one point, I try to joke about it, something like, "Wow, this feels like a job interview." But he just laughs and says, "Yeah, but the benefits are great." His parents laugh too, but it's not the kind of laugh that says, "Haha, we're joking." It's the kind that says, "We already have the wedding venue in mind." After dinner, his mom insists on showing me around the house. Family photos everywhere, vacations, holidays, birthdays. In one hallway, I spot a framed picture of Liam with an ex-girlfriend, smiling at what looks like an engagement party. His mom notices me looking and quickly says, "Oh, that didn't work out, but we know he's going to find the right one." We end up in the living room where coffee and dessert are waiting. At this point, I've mentally checked out. I'm just nodding and smiling while they talk about how rare it is to find someone serious these days. I wonder if Liam has done this before. Just brought first dates home like they're already in the running for wife of the year. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, Liam says we should get going. His mom hugs me like we're old friends, and his dad shakes my hand again, saying how wonderful it was to meet me. As we walk to the car, Liam casually asks if I want to hang out again soon, like the whole evening was just a normal first date. I don't even know how to respond. I mumble something about having a busy week and slide into my seat. The drive back is quiet, except for him thanking me for being such a good sport. I just nod, staring out the window, wondering how many other people have been through the same bizarre dinner audition. When he drops me off, he leans in like he's going to kiss me. I pretend I don't notice and quickly say thanks before hopping out. Inside my place, I just sit on the couch for a while, replaying the night. It's one thing to meet someone's parents early, maybe by accident, maybe at some casual event. But being the guest of honor at a candlelit family dinner on the first date, that's a whole other level. The next morning, he texts me saying his parents really liked me and think we'd make a great match. I don't reply right away. Eventually, I just send back a polite thanks, but I don't think this is going to work out. He doesn't respond. And that's fine. Because honestly, I think I was just one polite conversation away from being handed a wedding binder. I swear I wasn't looking for anything serious when I matched with Ethan. I was in that phase where you just want to go out, meet someone new, and not overthink it. His profile was normal enough. Some group photos, one of him holding a coffee cup in front of a brick wall, another with a dog that wasn't his but looked happy enough. His bio said he liked live music, cooking pasta from scratch, and late night deep talks. Nothing about it screamed run away. We messaged for about a week, mostly random stuff. He was sarcastic, but in a fun way, and not in that exhausting, constantly joking way some guys do. When he asked if I wanted to come over for drinks instead of going out somewhere, I thought, fine, I'll give it a try. He made it sound relaxed, no pressure, just hanging out. His place wasn't far from mine. When I pulled up, he texted me to come in because the door was unlocked. That was my first red flag, but I figured maybe he just didn't want to get up in the middle of cooking or something. I walked in and immediately noticed the smell, a mix of vanilla candles and something baking in the oven. His living room was cozy, couch with a big throw blanket, coffee table with a few books, and half-finished puzzle on it. He came out from the kitchen holding 2 glasses of wine like this was a scene in a movie. He handed me one, told me to make myself comfortable, and went back to check on whatever was in the oven. Everything felt pretty normal up to that point. We sat on the couch, chatting, sipping wine. He told me about his job. I told him about mine. Then he casually said his roommate would probably be home soon, so if I heard someone coming in, not to be surprised. I said okay. thinking maybe he had a friend or sibling who shared the place. About 20 minutes later, the front door opened. A woman walked in carrying a grocery bag. She looked about our age, wearing sweatpants and a hoodie, hair tied up like she'd just come from the gym. She glanced at me, then at Ethan, then just said, "Hey," and headed toward the kitchen. I figured maybe this was the roommate he mentioned. No big deal. But then I heard them talking in the kitchen, not loudly, but enough that I could tell their conversation was casual and comfortable in a way that felt familiar. She came back a minute later, walked over to the couch, and sat down next to Ethan, not next to me, next to him. They started talking about groceries, weekend plans, and some show they were both watching. I was just sitting there, wine in hand, trying to figure out where I fit into this scene. That's when Ethan turned to me and completely out of nowhere said, "Oh, this is Claire, my ex." I froze. My brain did that thing where it tries to pretend it didn't just hear what it heard. But he said it so casually, like he was introducing me to his coworker. Claire smiled politely and said hi again, then asked if I wanted a cookie because she'd just baked some yesterday. I nodded, still trying to piece together why I was sitting in a living room with a guy and his ex, Ethan, apparently sensing my confusion, explained that they still lived together because it was easier financially and less stressful than finding new roommates. I wanted to ask if it was also less stressful to just stop dating someone you still sleep next to, but I kept my mouth shut. I tried to steer the conversation to neutral topics, but Claire was very much part of it now. She and Ethan would trade little inside jokes, mention things they'd done recently, and occasionally look at each other in that way people do when they know exactly what the other person is thinking. It didn't feel like I was third wheeling. It felt like I'd accidentally walked into the middle of their ongoing relationship that they were just calling over. At one point, Ethan got up to check the oven again, leaving me alone with Claire. She smiled at me, the kind of smile that could mean anything from "I'm being polite" to "you're in my spot." She asked how I knew Ethan, and I said we'd been chatting on Tinder. She just nodded like that made sense, then said, "We've been meaning to try dating other people. It's good for both of us." Meaning to try. Good for both of us. I didn't even know what that meant. Was this some kind of open relationship situation they were easing into? Or was that literally the test run for seeing if either of them could date someone else while still sharing a bed? When Ethan came back, the three of us ended up eating dinner together. Yes, dinner, because apparently the drinks invite came with a full meal. It wasn't bad, but the whole time, I kept catching little glances between them. They weren't romantic exactly, but they weren't distant either. They had an ease together that you don't get from just being roommates. After dinner, Claire said she was going to watch TV in their room. Their room. She didn't even say my room or the bedroom. She just said our room like it was the most natural thing in the world. Ethan didn't correct her. I don't even think he noticed. We sat back on the couch, finished our wine, and he asked if I wanted to watch a movie. I said I should probably head home. He looked genuinely confused, like he couldn't imagine why I wouldn't want to stick around and hang out while his ex was in the next room. As I left, Claire called out from down the hall, "Nice meeting you," in this cheery tone that somehow made the whole thing even weirder. I got into my car and just sat there for a minute, trying to figure out if I'd misread everything or if I'd just been on a date with two people instead of one. He texted me later that night saying he had a great time and wanted to do it again soon. I stared at the message for a while, then just replied, "I don't think this is going to work." He never responded, which was fine by me. I'm not against people being friends with their exes. I'm not even against roommates who happen to have dated before. But when you still share a bed with that ex and then invite me over for a casual drink, you've left out some very important context. The only reason I even agreed to the hike was because Olivia looked like the type of person who would know the difference between a good trail and one that ends in you getting lost in a swamp. I'm not a hiking guy. I'm more of a walk to the fridge type. But her pictures were full of outdoorsy stuff. Her in a beanie holding a mug, her on top of a mountain with a huge grin, her next to a waterfall. And she kept saying how much she loved hiking. When we matched, she was quick to suggest doing something active instead of grabbing drinks. I figured one hike wouldn't kill me and maybe I'd get a good story out of it. I picked a Saturday morning when I didn't have much going on, threw on some sneakers, and drove out to meet her at the trailhead. She was already there when I arrived, leaning against her car, sipping from a stainless steel water bottle. She was dressed like she actually knew what she was doing. Breathable layers, sturdy boots, one of those backpacks with a tube sticking out so you can drink water while walking. I had a hoodie and a bottle of gas station water. The contrast was obvious. We started walking, and at first it was fine. The trail was wide, the air was fresh, and she was chatty in a friendly way. She pointed out plants, told me about different hikes she'd done, and seemed genuinely excited to be outside. I was doing my best to keep up without sounding like I was breathing too hard. About halfway up, the conversation drifted into dating app stuff. Bad dates, weird profiles, the usual. She mentioned that she didn't swipe right on most guys because she had a system. I asked what that meant, expecting her to say something about looking for similar interests or avoiding guys with fish photos. She just smiled and said she only swipes right on people she thinks she can physically outrun. I thought she was messing with me, so I laughed. But she didn't laugh back. She acted like this was just common sense. She explained that it was a safety thing. If she ever met someone sketchy, she wanted to make sure she could get away if she needed to. Apparently, she sized people up in their photos and imagined whether she could beat them in a sprint or on rough terrain. I wasn't sure how to take that. On one hand, I get wanting to be careful. On the other hand, knowing she'd match with me partly because she thought she could outrun me wasn't exactly flattering. I asked to have passed her test easily, and she said, "Yeah, no offense, but you don't look that fast." It was such a weird mix of insulting and practical that I didn't know how to respond. I just said fair and kept walking. She didn't seem awkward about it at all. She even started pointing out sections of the trail where she'd probably be able to lose me if she had to run. She was grinning while saying it, but I could tell she wasn't entirely joking. As we climbed higher, she kept weaving safety talk into the conversation, like which parts of the trail were good for making a quick escape, or how she always keeps her phone in an easy-to-reach pocket in case she needs to call someone fast. She said she's never had to actually run from a date, but she likes to be ready. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I started thinking about how weird it was to be on a date with someone who had already mentally rehearsed how to get away from me if I turned out to be dangerous. I mean, logically, it's smart for her, but for me, it made the whole thing feel strange, like I was hiking with someone who had me halfway in the possible threat category. We reached this overlook with a view of the hills and a little bench. We sat for a few minutes, eating snacks she'd brought. She offered me a granola bar, then said she always packs extra in case she has to bribe someone for help if she's running from trouble. I couldn't tell if she was serious or just had a very committed sense of humor. The hike back down was quicker. She was walking fast, and I kept thinking she was trying to test her outrun theory in real time. Every once in a while, she'd look over her shoulder at me like she was gauging my speed. At one point, she even joked, I think it was a joke, that this was basically her version of a background check. When we got back to the parking lot, she leaned against her car again. Same as when I first arrived. She said she had fun and might want to hang out again. But she also said, in this very casual tone, that she still thinks she could totally beat me in a race if it came down to it. I just told her I have a liter, because honestly, she was right. I'm not winning any foot races, especially not uphill. She said she'd text me later, hopped into her car, and drove off. I stood there for a minute, holding my now empty gas station water bottle, wondering what kind of dating strategy that really was. That night, she did text me. It was just a picture of her running shoes lined up by the door with the caption, "Always ready." I didn't really know how to respond, so I just sent back a thumbs up emoji. We never went on a second hike, not because she wasn't nice or fun to talk to, she was. But once you know someone is only interested in you because you're slow enough to escape from, it kind of changes the vibe. Now, whenever I'm swiping and see someone with a bunch of running or hiking pictures, I wonder if they're secretly measuring my potential escape time too. It was a random Thursday night, and I was bored enough to be scrolling Tinder without even realizing it. I wasn't looking for anything serious. I wasn't even sure I was looking for anything at all. But that's when I matched with Hannah. Her profile gave off this warm, calm energy. Soft lighting in her photos, pictures of her painting at an easel, or sitting cross-legged on a picnic blanket. She didn't have a single gym selfie, and that alone felt rare enough to swipe right. She messaged me first, which was nice. Something about how my hoodie in my photo looked too comfortable to be legal. I sent back a laughing emoji and told her it was my favorite one. We went back and forth for a bit. Nothing heavy, just silly messages that made the day pass quicker. After a couple of days, she suggested grabbing coffee. That sounded easy enough. We met at this quiet little cafe tucked away on a side street. Not one of those crowded chains. This place had mismatched chairs, plants in every corner, and a menu written in chalk. She was already there when I arrived, sitting by the window with a cappuccino. She waved me over with this bright smile, and I thought, yeah, this is going to be a good time. We ordered drinks. I got an iced latte. She got a refill of whatever fancy foam-topped thing she was drinking, and settled in. At first, the conversation flowed easily. We talked about music, favorite foods, a couple of random shows we'd both seen. She asked about my work, so I told her a little about what I do, just the general stuff. That's when her questions started to shift. Instead of the usual, what's your job like? Or do you enjoy it? She went straight into, so what's your salary? She said it like she was asking about the weather, no hesitation. I laughed thinking she was joking, but she just sat there waiting for an answer. I gave a vague range, hoping that would be enough, but then she followed up immediately with, is that before or after taxes? I wasn't even sure why she needed that detail, but she was looking at me like this was completely normal first date conversation. I tried to steer things back to something lighter. I asked about her work, and she gave me a very brief answer about freelancing before pivoting right back to me. Now she wanted to know how much I paid for rent, if I had roommates, and whether I had a car loan. I was starting to feel like I was filling out a mortgage application instead of having coffee with someone I just met. Then came the kicker. She asked if I had any debt. Not in a casual, oh, student loans are the worst way, but in very direct, how much exactly kind of way. I was so thrown off that I almost laughed again, but she was dead serious. She even clarified like credit cards, personal loans, anything like that. I told her I wasn't super comfortable breaking down my entire financial history, especially over coffee with someone I just met. She nodded like she understood, but then asked if I had any inheritance coming my way. At that point, I honestly thought I was on some hidden camera show, who jumps from lats to inheritance in under 20 minutes. I tried to keep my answers short, hoping she'd drop the topic, but she wasn't letting go. She wanted to know if I was planning on buying property someday, if I had any investments, if I'd ever considered starting my own business. It was like she had a checklist in her head, and we weren't moving on until she got through it. Part of me was curious enough to play along. I started giving her vague answers just to see where she was going with it. That's when she finally explained. She said she was looking for something serious and wanted to know if our long-term goals lined up. She framed it as being practical and efficient, so she wouldn't waste time. I get the logic on some level, but the way she was going about it felt less like getting to know me and more like assessing whether I met the criteria for a loan. She even admitted she'd done this with other people and that it weeded out the incompatible ones quickly. I couldn't help but wonder how many first dates she'd ended before the drinks even arrived. We managed to move on to other topics for a bit, but every time there was a lull in conversation, she'd circle back to money somehow. At one point, she asked if I'd be okay with a partner who didn't work full-time. Then she asked if I liked the idea of combining finances. I told her I hadn't exactly thought that far ahead. She said she had, and she was looking for someone financially stable enough to make it work. When we finally finished our drinks, I suggested we head out. She smiled and said she had a great time, which honestly surprised me. We walked outside, and before saying goodbye, she told me she'd think about whether we're aligned. She didn't say aligned in what way, but I'm pretty sure she meant financially, not romantically. On the drive home, I kept thinking about the conversation. I don't mind talking about money in a relationship. It's important, but having my entire financial profile dissected on the first date felt like a job interview for the position of provider. It made me wonder if she was actually interested in me or just in the numbers attached to my life. She texted me later that night, thanking me for meeting up. Then she asked if I'd be willing to share my annual expenses so she could get a fuller picture. I stared at my phone for a good minute before deciding not to reply. The next morning, she sent a follow-up saying she assumed I wasn't interested. I left it at that. Since then, anytime I'm on a date and someone asks me, so what do you do for work? There's a small part of me bracing for the follow-up. And how much does that pay? I wasn't even trying to match with anyone serious when Jack's profile showed up. I was half paying attention, swiping while a show played in the background, not really looking too closely at anyone. But his photos caught my eye because they were normal. No gym mirror shots, no fishing trophies, no obvious look at my car flexes. Just him smiling in a park and with a cup of coffee and sitting at some random diner booth. His bio said something short like big fan of coffee, books, and good company. Simple, safe. We matched pretty quickly, and within the first few messages, I could tell he was easy to talk to. He didn't ask anything too personal too fast. He didn't try to push the conversation anywhere weird, just kept it casual. When he suggested grabbing lunch, I figured why not. We met at this small sandwich place near the edge of downtown. It was one of those spots with mismatched furniture and chalkboard menus, the kind of place you go to once, and then recommend to everyone because you feel like you've discovered something. Jack was already there when I walked in, sitting at a corner table with a soda in front of him. He waved me over, and I noticed he had that kind of calm, steady energy that makes you feel like you can actually relax. We ordered food. I had a turkey sandwich. He got something with way too many vegetables for my taste, and settled into the usual small talk. Jobs, hobbies, weekend plans. It was going fine. Then somewhere between me unwrapping my sandwich and him taking his first bite, he asked me what I thought about dating apps in general. I said something like, "They're fine, just a way to meet people." He nodded, but then leaned forward like he was about to tell me a secret. That's when he started talking about how dating apps aren't really about dating at all. He said they were just data collection farms, and that the whole matching thing was just a way to keep people feeding the system more information. At first, I thought he was joking or exaggerating, but no, this was serious for him. He said every picture you upload, every message you send, every swipe you make is tracked, stored, and sold to companies. He said the apps build a profile on you so detailed it could guess where you'll be next Thursday at 3 p.m. He even claimed they could predict when you're most likely to feel lonely and send you just the right match to keep you hooked. He was talking about all of this like he read a classified document no one else had access to. He said he'd done his own research, which apparently meant watching a bunch of long videos online and reading articles that most people would probably scroll past. I tried to ask him what the end game was supposed to be. Was it just ads, selling your info? He said that was only part of it. He believed the bigger plan was to create digital personality maps of everyone so they could be nudged towards certain decisions, who to date, what to buy, even what to believe. I was half listening, half wondering if I should just steer the conversation back to something lighter, but he was already on a roll. He said the only reason he was on Tinder at all was because he wanted to see the system from the inside, and that every person he matched with was proof the data collectors were trying to profile him. Here's where it got really odd. He said he thought it might have been specifically sent to him by the algorithm because I fit some kind of test group he was part of. He said I probably didn't even realize it, but my answers to certain questions could help refine how the app targeted people like him. I kind of laughed and said, or maybe we just swiped right on each other. He shook his head and said, "That's exactly what they want you to think." From there, he kept tying every little thing back to his theory. When I mentioned I like coffee, he said the app probably picked up on that from my photos and matched me with someone who also liked coffee to make the conversation flow better. When I said I work from home sometimes, he said that meant they'd label me as flexible schedule and start matching me with people in the same category. The more he talked, the more it felt like he'd been waiting a long time to tell someone all of this. He wasn't loud or aggressive about it, more like a guy explaining a complicated board game to someone who didn't ask to play. By the time we finished eating, I had learned that he avoids using his real birthday on apps, never links his Instagram, and changes his profile pictures every couple of weeks just to confuse the algorithm. He also claimed that he uses a fake job title sometimes, which I guess is his version of wearing a disguise. When we walked out, he thanked me for listening without judgment, which made me feel a little guilty because I had been quietly judging the whole time. He said he'd like to see me again, but he understood if I didn't want to get caught up in all of this. On the drive home, I kept thinking about what he said. I don't know if I believe dating apps are as sinister as he made them sound, but he was so sure of it that part of me started wondering what it would be like to actually believe that every swipe was some kind of trap. He texted me later that night with a link to a 2-hour video titled something like "The Truth Behind Your Matches." I didn't click it. The next morning, he sent another message saying he'd respect my decision to stay unaware if I wasn't ready to dig deeper. That was the last I heard from him. I had matched him, not because I was offended, but because I could tell I was just going to end up as part of his ongoing case study. Now, anytime I get a match, I have this tiny voice in my head saying, maybe they were sent to you. I try to ignore it, but I'll admit I've started changing my profile pictures a little more often. It was one of those evenings where I was swiping just to keep my hands busy while a video played in the background. I wasn't even really paying attention to the profiles. Half the time I didn't remember who I'd swiped on until they popped up as a match. That's how Sophie happened. Her profile was worn. Photos of her sitting cross-legged on a blanket in the park, baking something in a messy kitchen, and laughing mid-bite at a restaurant. It didn't look staged. It felt real in a way Tinder profiles usually don't. Her bio just said, looking for someone kind who can make me laugh. Seemed harmless enough. We started messaging that night. She was quick to respond, but not in that overly eager way. It was easy conversation. Favorite foods, weird facts about our hometowns, music we'd been listening to lately. By the next day, she suggested lunch at a little Italian place she liked. I was free, so I said sure. When I walked in, she was already there, sitting by the window. She waved, smiling in a way that made me feel instantly at ease. We ordered pasta, shared some breadsticks, and settled into the kind of conversation that makes you think the date is going well. About halfway through the meal, she paused like she was debating whether to say something. Then she told me she had a bit of a specific dating pattern. I thought she meant something like only dating people who like the same hobbies or people who have dogs. I joked, "What, you only date guys who can make good lasagna?" She smiled, but shook her head. She said, as calmly as if she were explaining a favorite movie, that she only dated men who reminded her of her late father. I didn't know what to do with that information. She kept going before I could even respond. She said it wasn't just about personality, it was about appearance too. She liked men who looked like him. She thought it was comforting, familiar. She said it helped her feel safe. I sat there holding my fork, trying to figure out if I looked like her dad and if that was why I was sitting across from her in the first place. She must have noticed my hesitation because she started digging in her bag and pulled out a small photo album. Yes, an actual photo album. She flipped it open and showed me a picture of her father from years ago, smiling at a barbecue, wearing a button-up shirt, hair slightly messy from the wind. Then she looked at me and said, "See the resemblance?" I didn't see it at first, but the more I looked, the more I realized there were similarities. Not exact, but enough that I could tell why she thought so. My brain didn't know what to do with that. She explained that her dad had passed away a few years ago, and that ever since, she'd been drawn to men who reminded her of him. She dated a few who didn't, but it never felt right to her. She said it wasn't creepy or romantic in her mind. It was just a connection thing. I nodded slowly, trying to be respectful, but my head was spinning. I couldn't tell if this was deeply personal and sweet or just deeply strange. We went back to eating, but every time she looked at me, I started wondering if she was seeing me or seeing her dad. She'd make little comments like, "You can have a similar smile," or "He had that same way of leaning when he was talking." It made it really hard to just focus on the conversation. At one point, she told me about her last boyfriend and how he also looked like her dad. She even showed me a picture of him in the photo album, right next to another picture of her dad for comparison. She wasn't kidding when she said she had a pattern. By dessert, I was starting to feel like I was accidentally auditioning for a role I didn't sign up for. She didn't seem uncomfortable about it at all. In fact, she seemed happy that I fit her type. She said something about how rare it was to find someone who checked that box for her so clearly. We finished eating, and she suggested a walk through the nearby park. It was a nice day, so I agreed. As we walked, she told me stories about her dad, how he used to take her fishing, how he loved cheesy jokes, how he made the best pancakes. She laughed a lot while telling them, but she kept glancing at me like she was mapping the similarities in her head. When we got back to where we started, she said she'd like to see me again. She even joked that her dad would have approved. I wasn't sure how to respond to that without sounding weird myself, so I just smiled and said, "Yeah, maybe." On the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I don't think she meant anything wrong by it. In her mind, it was probably a harmless quirk. But for me, the idea of being chosen because I reminded someone of their parent, especially one who passed away, was a lot to process. She texted me later that evening, thanking me for a nice afternoon and sending me another picture of her dad so I could see the resemblance better. I didn't reply right away. The next day, she sent a follow-up saying she'd love to have dinner next weekend. I told her I wasn't sure I was the right fit for her, which felt like the understatement of the year. She didn't get upset, just said she understood and wished me the best. It's been a while since then, but every now and then I'll be scrolling and see a profile where the person says they like guys who remind them of home or have a familiar face. And now I always wonder if that's code for "you look like my dad." Connor didn't seem like the type to be hiding anything. His profile was short, almost lazy. A couple of pictures of him at the beach, one blurry selfie, and a shot of him holding a beer in front of a bonfire. His bio just said, "Looking to meet new people." That's it. Nothing about soulmates, nothing about long walks on the beach, nothing that hinted at drama. We matched on a Sunday night. He sent me a hey that I almost ignored, but I figured I'd give him a chance. He turned out to be a decent texter. Nothing amazing, but enough to keep me replying. He was straightforward about wanting to meet sooner rather than later. We settled on dinner at a casual burger place a few nights later. When I walked in, he was already there at a corner booth. He stood to say hi, gave me a quick smile, and we sat down. The conversation started off easy. Work, hobbies, weekend stuff. He told me he worked in construction and was trying to get more into management. I told him about my job, and we swapped a few random stories. The food came, and we were halfway through eating when things took a turn. He was talking about moving soon, and I asked if he was planning to buy a place or just rent. He shrugged and said he wasn't sure yet because it depended on how things went with his current situation. I asked what he meant, thinking maybe he was in the middle of a lease or figuring out roommates. But no, he looked right at me and said, "Well, I'm engaged." I thought I misheard him. I asked him to repeat it, and he did, calmly like it wasn't a bombshell. He explained that he and his fiance had been together for a few years, but things weren't working out. They talked about splitting, but they hadn't actually called off the engagement yet. I sat there, fries in hand, trying to process what he just told me. He didn't seem the least bit embarrassed. He went on to say that he was exploring transition options. I had no idea what that meant, so I asked. He said he didn't want to jump straight from being engaged to being single. He wanted to meet someone new first, start building a connection, and then make the break from his fiancée once he felt ready. Basically, he wanted to line up his next relationship before ending the current one. I didn't even know what to say. I asked if his fiancée knew he was doing this. He said she probably suspected, but they weren't really talking much these days. He added that they still lived together, which made the whole thing even worse. He tried to make it sound reasonable, like this was a smart way to handle a breakup. He said he didn't want to go through that awkward, lonely stage, and that it was better to have someone waiting on the other side. I was trying to wrap my head around the fact that I was in his mind, auditioning for the role of post-engagement girlfriend. He even said something like, "I think it's good to get the next chapter started before the last one ends." I asked him if he'd told anyone else this. He said no, I was the first. He said he wanted to be upfront with me so I didn't think he was playing games, as if the honesty somehow canceled out the fact that he was still engaged. The rest of the dinner was surreal. He kept talking about how he was ready for a change, and how he could see himself with someone different than his fiancée. He never trashed her. He actually spoke about her kindly, but it was clear he had one foot out the door and was already scanning for the exit. At one point, he asked me if I could see myself dating someone who had unfinished business. I told him that wasn't really my thing. He nodded like he expected that answer, but didn't seem bothered. He said not everyone was cut out for transition dating. When the check came, he offered to pay. I let him, mostly because I wanted to see if he was going to try to set up another date. Sure enough, as we walked out, he said he'd like to see me again. He even suggested brunch that weekend. I told him I'd have to think about it. He said he understood. He gave me a quick hug and walked to his car like we'd just had a normal first date. On the drive home, I kept thinking about his logic. I get that breakups are hard and that nobody wants to be lonely, but the idea of recruiting your next partner before ending your engagement is just wrong. It's like quitting a job but still showing up every day until the new one starts, except instead of a job, it's a relationship you promised to marry into. He texted me later that night, thanking me for being cool about everything. I didn't respond. The next day, he sent another message saying, "If you change your mind, let me know. I think we could be good together." I matched him after that. Now, whenever I meet someone new, there's a small part of me that wonders if they're actually single or if they're just in the lining up the next one stage. And honestly, I'm not sure which would be worse. Lauren's profile wasn't flashy. No perfectly staged beach shots, no wine glass boomerangs, no "here I am doing a handstand on a cliff" photos. Her first picture honestly looked like it could have been taken on a slightly outdated phone. She was sitting on a couch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, smiling at the camera like whoever took the picture made her laugh right before snapping it. It felt real. The second photo was her mid-bite into a pizza slice, so big it looked like it could have been used as a blanket. I've always had a soft spot for people who aren't afraid to look a little goofy in their dating profiles, so I swiped right. Her bio sealed it for me. It said, books, coffee, and heated debates about fictional characters. I will judge you if you dog your pages. I thought it was clever without trying too hard. We matched later that day, and she messaged me first, asking if I'd ever cried over the end of a book. I said yes and told her which one. She told me hers, and we ended up trading stories about our worst emotional damage from fictional plots. The conversation stayed fun for the next couple of days. She was quick to joke, but didn't use sarcasm like it was her only personality trait. She actually asked questions about me that weren't just placeholders. By day 3, she suggested lunch. She picked a cafe near the park that I'd never been to, but she swore they had the best iced chai latte in a 20-mile radius. When I got there, she was sitting outside with one of those giant clear cups already in hand, reading a paperback. She looked up, smiled, waved me over, and tucked the book into her bag. We ordered. I went for a chicken wrap. She ordered a salad that could have fed 3 people and grabbed a table in the shade. At first, it was exactly what I hoped for. Casual conversation, easy laughs, no weird moments of silence. But about 20 minutes in, she mentioned something that made me pause. She said she was really glad to meet me because she'd been talking about me at her book club. I assumed she meant it in that, oh, I told my friends I had a date way, so I asked how big her book club was. She said it was her and 2 of her closest friends. Then she added, without hesitation, that they'd like to meet me soon so they could approve me. I laughed because it sounded like a joke. She didn't laugh back. She explained that her friend group had always been very involved in each other's dating lives. If one of them started seeing someone new, the other 2 would meet that person and give their feedback. And apparently, their feedback wasn't just casual advice. It was treated as a deciding factor in whether the relationship continued. I asked if they'd ever told her not to date someone. She said yes a couple of times. In both cases, she ended things right after. She didn't say it like she regretted it. She said it like she was describing how to make coffee, just matter of fact. Then she outlined what would happen. I come to one of their book club meetings, which was usually at one of her friends' apartments. There would be wine, snacks, and a discussion about whatever book they'd just read. I'd be there for all of it. Then, after I left, they'd have a private review session where they'd talk about me. She'd get the verdict later that night. If they liked me, she'd keep dating me. If not, well, game over. I tried to keep my face neutral, but in my head, I was picturing myself sitting on a stranger's couch eating brie, while 2 women I'd never met sized me up. I asked if the meeting was at least casual. She said yes, then started giving me tips. Apparently, I should have at least 2 favorite books ready to talk about, avoid politics, and try not to sound too agreeable, because they respected people who could defend their opinions. She also warned me that one friend might test me with a hot take just to see how I handled it. It was starting to sound less like meeting friends and more like prepping for a panel interview. I asked if she really thought her friend's opinion should matter that much in her relationships. She said absolutely, that they knew her better than anyone and could see red flags she might miss. We finished lunch, but the vibe had shifted for me. She didn't seem to notice. Before we got up, she asked if I was free in 3 nights because that's when the next meeting was. Walking back to our cars, she mentioned that one of her friends had already done some research on me. She didn't elaborate, but I didn't need her to. I knew exactly what that meant. When I got home, I thought about it for a while. I'm all for friends looking out for each other, but the idea that my relationship fate would be decided by a 2/3 majority vote from people who didn't know me didn't sit right. It felt like outsourcing personal choice to a committee. That evening, she texted me the time and address for the book club meeting, plus a reminder to bring an open mind. I typed out a polite message saying I didn't think the approval process thing worked for me, then deleted it and just said I had a scheduling conflict. She wrote back quickly saying no problem. They could reschedule so I could still come. That's when I decided I had to be honest. I told her it wasn't something I was comfortable with. She replied, "That's okay, it's not for everyone." And that was the last message we exchanged. I never found out if she told her friends about me anyway, or if they had a whole separate discussion without me there. But now, whenever I hear someone say, "My friends have to like you," I always wonder if they mean they'll be friendly or they'll run the hiring process. And honestly, I'm not sure which is worse. Ben's profile didn't stand out right away. It was one of those that you scroll past, then scroll back to because something about it nags at you. His first picture was him sitting in the hood of an old car in a hoodie and jeans, nothing flashy. The second was a blurry group shot where I had to guess which person he was. His bio was short, looking for something real. Normally, I roll my eyes at that line, but something about the mix of low-effort photos and a sincere sentence made me swipe right. He messaged me first, just a hey with a smile emoji. Normally, that would make me think someone wasn't trying at all, but I replied anyway. The conversation started slow, but picked up after a few messages. He asked about my favorite movies, told me he was really into old-school rock bands, and said he worked at a small auto repair shop. He seemed down to earth. After a couple of days, he suggested we grab drinks. We met at this dive bar near the edge of town, the kind of place with mismatched chairs, a jukebox that only half works, and a bartender who looks like he's been there since the place opened. Ben was already at a table when I walked in. He stood up, gave me a quick smile, and waved me over. We ordered beers and started talking. At first, it was the usual first date stuff: work, hobbies, favorite foods. He told me he liked to fix up old cars in his free time and that he still hung out with a lot of his friends from high school. He seemed like the kind of guy who liked routine. About 30 minutes in, he started telling me a story about his high school years. He said there was this girl he had a massive crush on. The kind where you think about them every day, but never actually tell them how you feel. He said they had a few classes together and sometimes hung out in the same group, but nothing ever happened. I nodded along, thinking it was just a nostalgic tangent. But then he kept going. He told me how, over the years, he'd always wondered what it would have been like if they'd gotten together. He'd run into her a few times since high school, but she'd either been dating someone or they were both too busy to catch up. I thought it was a little odd that he was going so deep into this, but I figured maybe he just likes telling stories. And he said something that made me stop mid-sip of my drink. He looked at me and said, "You kind of remind me of her." I gave him a polite smile, not sure what to say. He went on to explain that it wasn't just my hair or my face, though apparently those played a part. It was the vibe. He said there was something about the way I talked and even how I laughed that felt familiar to him. That's when it clicked. This wasn't just a casual observation. He wasn't just saying I looked like someone he used to know. He was telling me that I was, in some way, a stand-in for his high school crush. I tried to brush it off, but he kept circling back to it. He started asking me questions that were oddly specific, like if I liked certain bands or if I'd ever been into a particular sport. When I said yes to one of them, he grinned and said she liked that too. It started feeling less like a date and more like an audition. I wasn't sure if he was genuinely interested in me or if he was just ticking off boxes to see how close I came to matching his memory of this other person. At one point, he admitted that he'd dated a few girls who reminded him of her before, but it never quite fit. I asked if he still talked to her. He said no, she was married now, but that didn't change the fact that she was the one that got away. I was sitting there thinking, so what does that make me? The replacement. The substitute cast member in the movie of your life. We finished our drinks, and he suggested ordering another round. I went along with it mostly because I was curious to see how much more he'd reveal. Sure enough, he started describing more details about her, what she wore, the way she used to doodle in her notebook, how she once gave him half her sandwich at lunch. It was like he had the whole thing stored in high definition in his brain. Then he looked at me again and said, "You can have the same kind of smile." I didn't know if it was meant as a compliment or if I should be mildly concerned. He didn't seem creepy exactly, just fixated, like he'd been carrying this torch for so long that he'd molded his dating life around finding someone who could light it again. When the night wrapped up, he walked me to my car. He said he had a great time and wanted to see me again. I said I'd let him know, which is my polite way of saying no. He gave me a hug, and as we pulled away, he said, "You really do remind me of her." On the drive home, I couldn't shake the weirdness of it. I get having a type. I get being nostalgic about someone from your past. But when your type is specifically someone who reminds me of this one person I never dated in high school, it starts to feel less like preference and more like chasing a ghost. He texted me later that night, thanking me for meeting up. I didn't reply. The next day, he sent another message saying, "I think you could be the one to fix my missed opportunity." That pretty much confirmed everything I was already thinking. I matched him and moved on. But now, whenever someone starts telling me about a past crush, I pay a lot more attention to how they talk about them. Because there's a big difference between I had a crush in high school and I'm still searching for a carbon copy of my high school crush. And if I ever hear you remind me of her again, I'm probably finishing my drink and heading out early. Sometimes when I match with someone on Tinder, I get this gut feeling right away about how the date will go. With Chloe, I didn't get anything. No gut feeling, no instinct, just blank. Her profile didn't give much to work with. A couple of pictures of her with friends, one selfie in a bathroom mirror, and a shot of her sitting outside at what looked like a cafe. Her bio was just big breakfast person. That line was the only reason I swiped right. I'm a breakfast person too, and I figured worst case scenario, we could at least talk about pancakes. We matched later that night. She messaged me the next morning asking if I liked brunch. I said yes, she said. Cool, let's do brunch this weekend. It was that fast, no small talk, no lead up, just straight to setting the date. Saturday morning, she sent me the address of a little diner downtown. I showed up a few minutes early. It was one of those classic spots with red vinyl booths, big laminated menus, and servers who call you Han without thinking about it. I grabbed a booth and waited. Chloe walked in right on time, holding the hand of a little kid who looked about 3 years old. She smiled like this was completely normal. I must have looked confused because she immediately said, "Oh, this is my son." I said hi to him, still trying to process the fact that she brought a kid to a first date. She slid into the booth across from me, lifted him onto the seat next to her, and started helping him with a coloring sheet the server brought over. Before I could even ask, she leaned in and lowered her voice just enough so the kid couldn't hear. She told me she had a small favor to ask. She wanted me to pretend to be her son's dad for the rest of brunch. I honestly thought I misheard her. But no, she said it again, clearer this time. She explained that the staff at this diner knew her from when she used to come in with her ex, and she wanted to test out what it would feel like to present as a family with someone new. I didn't even know where to start with that. This wasn't a role I signed up for. I told her I didn't think I was the right person for this experiment, but she waved it off and said it would just be for fun, nothing serious. Then the server came over, and before I could say anything, she introduced me as her guy and made some little joke about how her son had his dad's appetite. I sat there frozen, trying to decide if I should correct her or just go with it to avoid making things weird in front of the kid. The kid, for the record, didn't seem to care. He was too busy coloring a picture of a train. Chloe, on the other hand, seemed completely committed to the bit. She asked me what I wanted for our boy, if I thought he'd eat pancakes or waffles like we'd been making these decisions together for years. Halfway through ordering, she asked if I minded cutting up his food for him when it came so it would look more natural. I was in so deep at this point that I just said sure. When the food came, she kept up the act. She told the kid to listen to Dad and asked me to hand him the syrup. Every time the server came by, she gave me these knowing smiles, like we were in on some sweet little family secret. Meanwhile, I was trying not to make direct eye contact with anyone because I didn't want to deal with the confusion if someone asked questions. She kept slipping little comments into the conversation that made me wonder if she was actually enjoying this way more than she was letting on. She asked if I ever wanted kids, what I'd name them, if I thought I'd be a strict parent. I answered vaguely, hoping she'd drop it, but she just kept going. At one point, the kid spilled some juice and she laughed and said, "This is why we can't take you anywhere, just like your dad." I didn't know whether to laugh or crawl under the table. By the time we finished eating, I'd gone from mildly amused to deeply uncomfortable. It wasn't the kid's fault. He was sweet and polite and didn't cause any trouble. But the fact that she'd thrown me into this pretend family role without warning was a lot. When the bill came, she slid it toward me without saying anything. I figured fine, I'd pay just to wrap this up faster. The total wasn't bad, but the situation made it feel heavier. We left the diner. As we walked outside, she thanked me for playing along and said I'd done really well, like I just passed some kind of test. She asked if I wanted to do something else with them that day, maybe go to the park. I told her I had plans, which was a lie, but I needed an exit. She didn't seem offended. She just nodded, said it was nice meeting me, and buckled her kid into the car seat before driving off. On the walk back to my own car, I replayed the whole morning in my head. I couldn't figure out if she'd done this before or if I was the first one. Either way, it felt way too personal for a first date. She texted me later that day, thanking me again and saying she thought her son had really taken to me. She followed it with, Let's do this again sometime. I didn't reply. I'm all for people being upfront about having kids. I respect it when someone says so in their profile and introduces them honestly. But showing up to brunch with your child and asking your date to pretend to be their parent, that's something else entirely. Now, whenever I see mom of one or parent first in a bio, I can't help but picture myself back in that booth, cutting up pancakes for a kid I met 30 minutes earlier while his mom pretended we were a family. Some first dates feel like you're both stepping into the unknown together. Others feel like the other person has a whole plan you're just stepping into. With Adam, it was definitely the second kind. His profile didn't scream trouble. It was kind of generic, honestly. He had a few pictures, one in sunglasses at some rooftop bar, one with a group of guys at a sporting event, and one where he was holding a drink in what looked like a fancy cocktail lounge. His bio just said, "I like good conversation and better drinks." It was bland but safe. We matched on a Wednesday and he messaged me later that night. His opening line wasn't anything special, just, "Hey, how's your week?" But he kept the conversation moving enough that I didn't lose interest. By Friday afternoon, he suggested meeting for drinks that night. He needed a trendy spot downtown, and since I didn't have plans, I agreed. The bar was one of those places with low lighting, exposed brick walls, and a constant hum of conversation. The music wasn't so loud that you had to shout, but just loud enough that you had to lean in a little to hear someone. Adam was at the bar when I walked in, waving me over with a big grin like we'd known each other for years. We ordered drinks. I went with something simple. He got some kind of citrusy cocktail and grabbed a small table off to the side. At first, it felt like a normal date. We talked about work, favorite foods, random weekend activities. He was confident without being overbearing, and I thought, okay, this could be fine. Then, about 15 minutes in, he mentioned that some of his friends were also at the bar. He asked if I wanted to meet them. I figured sure. Meeting friends on a first date isn't super common, but it could happen. Maybe it would just be a quick hello. We walked over to a table where 4 people were sitting. 2 guys, 2 women, all clearly comfortable with each other, already a few drinks in. Adam introduced me around. Everyone smiled and greeted me warmly. The first few minutes were easy enough. They asked how we met, joked about Adam's dating habits, and teased him about bringing me around so soon. Then one of the women, blonde hair, big hoop earrings, suddenly said, "All right, let's rate her." I froze for a second, sure I'd misheard, but the others nodded like she'd just suggested ordering another round. Adam laughed and said something like, "Yeah, let's see where she lands." It was so casual, so practiced, that I realized instantly this wasn't a joke. This was a thing they did, and not just occasionally, this was clearly a tradition. The first guy leaned back, gave me a quick once-over, and said, 8. Another guy said, 7, but could be higher depending on personality. The blonde woman who started it said, 9, and she's funny. The second one just smirked and said, "We'll see." I sat there stunned, my drink halfway to my mouth. They weren't even trying to hide it. This was a live, in-person review of me like I was some product they were testing out. Adam was just grinning, clearly enjoying the process. I tried to laugh it off, but inside I was thinking, what grown adult does this? I asked if they did it for everyone he dated, and Adam confirmed it. He even pulled out his phone, scrolled through his notes app, and showed me a list of names with numbers next to them. "We've been doing this for years," he said proudly, like it was some team sport. The awkwardness didn't stop there. As the conversation went on, they kept making little comments tied to the rating. If I said something they liked, one of them would say, "That's a point for her." If I hesitated or disagreed, they'd say, "Might have to knock her down a bit." They said it jokingly, but it didn't feel like a joke. I tried steering the conversation elsewhere, but it always found its way back. They asked about my job, my hobbies, my family, all normal questions, but now I couldn't shake the feeling they were mentally adjusting my score with each answer. Eventually, Adam suggested we head back to the bar for another drink. I agreed, more to escape the table than because I wanted to keep drinking. Back at the bar, I told him I thought the whole rating thing was weird. He shrugged and said it was just a harmless way for his friends to keep him grounded and make sure he didn't get carried away with someone who wasn't a good match. I pointed out that reducing people to a number wasn't exactly a great way to get to know them. He laughed and told me I was overthinking it, and it was just for fun. We finished our drinks, and I told him I needed to get going. He walked me to the door, and just as I was about to leave, asked if I wanted to know my final score. I told him no. He grinned anyway and said, 9. Not bad at all. On the way home, I kept replaying the night in my head. It's one thing to care about your friends' opinions, but inviting them to rate your date while you're sitting right there, that's something else entirely. Later that night, Adam texted me saying his friends really liked me and that I passed. Passed what exactly? I had no idea. The next day, he sent another message saying they'd love to hang out again so I could lock in my rating. That was enough for me. I had matched him and moved on. Since then, whenever someone says, "You should meet my friends," I picture that table. 4 people sipping cocktails and debating whether I'm a 7 or a 9 like they're on a game show panel. And I think maybe I'll just pass on that invitation. I didn't match with Isabella thinking it would be anything out of the ordinary. Her profile looked like the kind of thing you see all the time. Bright, perfectly lit photos, big smiles, and captions that sounded just a little too polished to be completely spontaneous. She had one picture at a rooftop brunch, one at the beach holding a coconut drink, one in front of a neon sign that said something like "Good Vibes Only." Her bio read, "Capturing life beautifully, always chasing the next adventure." I wasn't totally sure if she was talking about travel or relationships, but it was intriguing enough to swipe right. We matched the same day. She messaged me first, asking if I liked brunch. I said yes. She immediately suggested meeting at a cafe that weekend. No back and forth small talk. No, let's chat a bit first. Just straight to setting a date. I didn't mind. Sometimes it's nice when people don't drag it out. The cafe she picked was one of those trendy downtown spots where the food looks like art and the prices make you pause for a second before ordering. When I got there, she was already sitting outside at a corner table, sipping what looked like a green smoothie. She had a small tripod set up next to her and her phone resting in it, angled just so. I thought maybe she was waiting for a friend and wanted to take a picture when they arrived. But when she saw me, she smiled, waved me over, and immediately reached for the phone. We ordered. She got some avocado toast thing topped with edible flowers. I went for a breakfast sandwich because I was hungry and didn't care if it looked pretty. As soon as the drinks came, she slid her phone back into the tripod and hit record. I figured she was going to do a quick clip for Instagram stories or something. No, she kept it rolling. She started describing her drink into the camera like a food reviewer, explaining the flavors and textures, smiling between every sentence. Then she turned the camera to me and asked, "What do you think of yours?" I wasn't prepared to be on camera before my first sip of coffee. I mumbled something about it being good. She beamed like I'd nailed a scripted line. It didn't stop there. She filmed the server bringing our food, filmed herself cutting into her toast, and filmed me taking my first bite of my sandwich. Every so often, she'd pause mid-conversation to move the tripod for a better angle. She'd say things like, "Hold that thought," and "Wait, say that again. I want to get it on camera." I started realizing this wasn't just casual documenting. This was her content. She was running her Instagram lifestyle account in real time during our date, and I was the unpaid guest star. I tried to talk to her about normal stuff, where she grew up, how she got into her job, but everything kept looping back into the filming. If I told a story, she'd rephrase it for the camera, adding little flourishes and making it sound like we were in a cozy rom-com. If I asked her something personal, she'd answer half to me and half to her followers. When we finished eating, I thought maybe we'd switch to just walking and talking. Nope. She kept the phone in her hand like an extra limb. As we walked to a nearby park, she'd stop every few feet to film something. A flower bed, a mural, a coffee shop sign. At one point, she asked me to walk ahead of her so she could get a candid shot of me looking at the scenery. She even asked me to hold her coffee so she could film herself talking with both hands free. I joked that I was basically her production assistant at this point. She laughed and said, "You're a natural at this." By the time we got to the park, I was hyper aware of everything I said and did. I didn't want to end up in a clip making a weird face or caught mid-bite of something. But she didn't slow down. She sat us on a bench, positioned the camera, and started talking to her audience about how great the day was going. She made it sound like we'd been dating for weeks instead of meeting for the first time. At one point, she asked me to give a little intro about myself for the followers. I half-heartedly said my name and what I do for work. She nudged me to say more, but I kept it short. She didn't seem to notice how uncomfortable I was. When we started heading back toward the cafe, I thought maybe she'd wrap things up. Instead, she filmed herself thanking me for such a perfect date, while I was standing right there smiling awkwardly at the phone. Back at the cafe, she hugged me goodbye and said she'd send me the video once it was up. I nodded, and all I could think was, please don't tag me. Later that night, curiosity got the better of me. I looked up her Instagram. Sure enough, there it was, a polished, edited version of our date. Cute captions, soft background music, slow motion shots of the food. She even put in little on-screen quotes from me, which I definitely didn't say in exactly those words. The comments were full of people saying things like, "You two are adorable," and "When's the wedding?" She replied to a few with laughing emojis, leaning into the bit like it was a running joke. The next day, she messaged me saying her followers loved the video and that I should totally be in more of them. She suggested a weekend farmer's market for our next date. I didn't respond. I'm not against people making content. I get that it's a hobby or even a career for some, but turning a first date into a curated public performance without asking first, that's not capturing life, that's scripting it. Now, if I see content creator in someone's profile, I swipe left unless they specifically say they don't film dates. Because once you've been the supporting character in someone else's lifestyle brand without agreeing to it, you learn real quick to avoid being cast in the sequel. I matched with Tyler on a Tuesday night when I was half watching TV and half scrolling Tinder just to avoid doing laundry. His profile looked like it had been thrown together in 5 minutes. A blurry picture of him holding a dog, one of him at a barbecue, and a mirror selfie in what looked like a hotel room. His bio just said, "Figuring things out." Normally, that would have been a red flag for me, but the dog picture bought him some goodwill. He messaged me the next morning with a simple, "Hey, want to grab dinner this week?" Straight to the point. I said sure, and we picked Thursday. He chose a burger place near the edge of downtown. When I got there, he was already seated at a small booth, wearing a plain t-shirt and jeans, looking like he'd just come from running errands. He smiled, stood up, and gave me a quick, "Hey, glad you could make it." We ordered our food, made some small talk about work and weekend plans. He told me he did something in IT, but didn't really get into details. I talked a bit about my job, and he nodded politely. Everything felt pretty normal. Then, as I was halfway through talking about a trip I'd taken last year, he leaned forward and said, "So, I should probably tell you, my therapist told me to start dating." I blinked, not sure what he meant. He explained that he'd been in therapy for the past few months, and one of the things his therapist recommended was to practice being emotionally vulnerable with strangers. Apparently, dating was part of that exercise. He wasn't joking. He said he wasn't necessarily looking for a relationship right now. This was more about exposure therapy for his social life. He said he'd been struggling to open up to people, so his therapist suggested real-life situations where he'd have to. First dates, he said, were perfect for that. I sat there holding my water glass, trying to process that I was essentially a homework assignment. I asked him if that meant he didn't see this going anywhere. He shrugged and said, "Maybe, maybe not. It's not really about that for me right now." I didn't know how to feel about it. On one hand, I get it. Therapy is important, and sometimes you need to push yourself into uncomfortable situations to grow. On the other hand, finding out mid-burger that you're part of someone's emotional workout plan is something. He went on to explain that he'd been on a few practice dates already, and that each time he tried to share a little more about himself. I asked if that meant he was going to start unloading deep personal stuff on me, and he laughed, saying, "Not unless you ask." Then he did exactly that. He told me about his last relationship, how it ended badly, how he basically shut himself off from dating for a couple of years. He talked about his family, some difficult stuff from his childhood, and how hard it was for him to trust people. It wasn't surface level. He was going deep. Part of me respected the honesty, but part of me felt like I was sitting in a therapy session I didn't sign up for. Every time I tried to steer the conversation back to lighter topics, he eventually circled back to some personal struggle or emotional barrier. At one point, he asked me to tell him something real about myself, something I wouldn't normally share with someone I just met. I told him I wasn't sure I was ready to swap deep confessions over fries. He nodded and said that was fair, but encouraged me to give it a try. It wasn't an uncomfortable date exactly, but it wasn't what I'd call fun either. There were no jokes, no playful banter, just a lot of serious conversation sprinkled with long pauses where he seemed to be mentally taking notes on how he was doing. When the check came, he insisted on paying. As we walked outside, He thanked me for helping him open up more than usual and said this was good progress. I wasn't sure if that was meant to be a compliment for me or just an update for his mental health tracking. He asked if I wanted to do it again sometime. I told him I have to think about it. He didn't seem bothered, just nodded and said, no pressure. Then he headed off in the opposite direction. On the way home, I kept thinking about the whole thing. I don't have anything against someone using dating to practice social skills or vulnerability. In fact, it's probably a smart move for some people. But I think I'd like to know beforehand if I'm signing up for a practice round instead of a real attempt at a connection. The next day, he sent me a message thanking me again and saying he'd learned a lot from our conversation. He said he was going to share it with his therapist. That's when it really sank in. I wasn't a date. I was field research. I didn't reply, not because I was mad, but because I didn't know what to say. Anything I sent back would have felt like I was contributing to his therapy notes. Now, anytime someone tells me they're just figuring things out, I can't help but wonder if they mean they're figuring it out with a professional and I'm just part of the homework. Grace's profile gave me the impression she was one of those people who had her life together. Every picture looked effortless but intentional. Her at a farmer's market with a tote bag, her laughing in a sunlit kitchen, her hiking with a well-worn backpack that made her look like she actually knew what she was doing outdoors. Her bio said, ambitious but chill. That combination made me curious enough to swipe right. We matched in the middle of the afternoon, and she messaged me first. It was short. Hey, you seem cool. Want to hang out this week? No warm-up questions, no back and forth. Just straight to scheduling. I like the efficiency. We agreed to meet at her place for coffee before maybe going for a walk. She said she made great coffee and lived close to a nice park. Sounded simple enough. Her apartment was on the second floor of an older building with a green front door, a tiny balcony just big enough for 2 chairs. When she opened the door, she greeted me with this big smile, wearing sweatpants and a hoodie, hair tied back in a way that somehow still looked good. Inside, her place was cozy. Warm lighting, plants on every windowsill, a bookshelf stuffed with paperbacks. She poured me a cup of coffee from a French press and gestured toward the couch. I figured we'd sit, drink, and talk. But before I could even take a sip, she said, so I have kind of a weird favor to ask. That's never a great opener. She disappeared into the other room and came back holding a stack of papers. Not a small stack either. She set them down on the coffee table in front of me. Job applications. I've been really stressed about finding a new job, she said, and I thought maybe you could help me fill some of these out. You probably know how to write the good answers. I laughed, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. She handed me a pen. I asked her why she couldn't just do them herself. She said paperwork made her anxious, and she tended to put it off until the last minute. She said she figured this way we could make it fun and get it done while we hung out. Fun wasn't exactly the word I used for filling out a stranger's job applications, but I didn't know how to shut it down without making things awkward. So I skimmed the first form. It was for a customer service position. She had already filled in her name and address, but left everything else blank. I asked her for some details, past work history, skills, anything, and she gave me the most basic answers possible, like worked in retail and good with people. Every time I tried to get more specifics, she'd shrug and say, just make it sound nice. So there I was on a first date, essentially ghostwriting her professional history while she sipped coffee and scrolled through her phone. Every so often she'd look up and say, you're doing great, like I was a kid working on homework. After the third application, I asked how many more there were. She said, oh, just a few, and pointed to the rest of the stack. It looked like at least 10. I told her maybe we could just do a couple and she could handle the rest later. She said, but you're so good at it. It was surreal. This was supposed to be coffee and maybe a walk, not a pop-up resume service. At one point, she asked me to create a new email account for her so she could start fresh for job hunting. She said she hated making up usernames because they always sounded weird. I suggested she take over for a bit while I finished my coffee. She half-heartedly started typing but quickly pushed the papers back toward me. I trust your way more, she said. By the time I was halfway through the fourth application, I realized I was spending more time thinking about her career than my own. She sat there scrolling job listings on her phone, occasionally handing me one to apply for on her behalf. I didn't know if I was supposed to be flattered or concerned. When I finally finished the fifth application, I set the pen down and said maybe we should take that walk now. She hesitated, clearly still thinking about the stack, but eventually agreed. The walk was fine, pleasant even, but it was hard to focus on casual conversation after spending the first hour of the date pretending to be her administrative assistant. As we headed back to her place, she thanked me for being such a lifesaver and said she didn't know how she would have gotten it done without me. I smiled politely, but inside I was thinking, you would have done it exactly the same way everyone else does, by sitting down and just doing it. She asked if I wanted to hang out again later in the week. I told her I'd let her know. When I got home, she texted me a picture of the stack of completed applications with a bunch of heart emojis. I didn't reply. It's not that I mind helping people out sometimes, but there's a difference between lending a hand and being used as free labor by someone you've known for less than an hour. Now, whenever someone says, let's just hang out at my place for a first date, I always picture that coffee table covered in job applications and wonder if I should bring my own pen just in case. I matched with No on a rainy Sunday afternoon when I was bored and avoiding cleaning my kitchen. His profile was fine. A couple of hiking shots, one picture of him with a big goofy grin holding a slice of pizza, and a short bio that said, always curious, always hungry. Not bad. He sent the first message, asking what my go-to comfort food was. We chatted about food for a bit, then about travel, then about movies. He seemed easy to talk to, curious without being nosy, funny without being over the top. At the end of the conversation, he asked if I wanted to meet for coffee later in the week. We picked a little cafe downtown. Not a chain. The kind with mismatched mugs, indie music playing quietly in the background, and staff who looked like they could start a band at any moment. When I walked in, he was already there, sitting at a corner table with a notebook next to his coffee. He stood, smiled, and greeted me warmly. We ordered drinks. I got a latte, he got black coffee, and sat down. We talked for maybe 5 minutes before he leaned in like he was about to tell me something confidential. He said, so, just so you know, I'm working on a book. I smiled and asked what kind of book. That's when he dropped it. It's an expose on dating apps, he said. At first, I thought he meant he was doing research in the casual sense, like just talking to people, gathering stories. But no, he said he was interviewing matches in person to get real-time insights into how people present themselves versus how they actually are. And that's when it clicked. I wasn't here on a date. I was here for an interview. I laughed awkwardly and asked if he was serious. He nodded, flipping open his notebook. I'll only write down what you're comfortable sharing, he said, like that somehow made it better. He assured me he wouldn't use my name, but he did want to quote me. I asked if everyone he met on the app knew about this ahead of time. He said no. He wanted people's authentic reactions. He believed telling people up front would make them perform and ruin the data. So now I was sitting across from a guy who had basically tricked me into being part of his book. He started asking questions, not light ones either. He wanted to know why I was on dating apps, what I thought of men's profiles, how often I swiped right, and what would make me unmatch someone instantly. Every answer I gave, he jotted down in his notebook. I tried to keep it vague, hoping we could shift the conversation back to something more date-like, but he kept steering it toward his project. He asked if I'd ever misrepresented myself on an app, if I ever lied about my intentions, if I'd ever gone on a date just for the free food or drinks. It was like being cross-examined. At one point, I asked what exactly he was hoping to prove with this book. He said he wanted to show how dating apps manufacture connection and how people curate their personalities to fit what they think others want. He wanted to expose the disconnect between profile and person. I couldn't tell if he genuinely believed he was doing something groundbreaking or if he just liked the idea of being the guy who wrote a book about dating apps. The whole time I kept thinking, why didn't you just say this in your profile? I probably still would have met you, just with the understanding that I was part of research, not romance. About halfway through, he asked if he could record me on his phone instead of writing everything down. He said it would be less distracting for him. I said no. He didn't push it, but I could tell he wasn't thrilled. When our drinks were gone, I thought maybe the interview portion was over. But no, he pulled out a second notebook, apparently one he used for longer, more personal stories, and asked if I'd be willing to share my most memorable dating app moment. I gave him a short, sanitized version of a weird date I'd been on. He scribbled notes furiously like I'd just given him gold. Then he asked follow-up questions. So many follow-up questions. It was exhausting. Eventually, I told him I had to head out. He thanked me for my time like I just sat for a magazine profile. As I stood up, he asked if I'd be willing to meet again to go deeper into my experiences. I told him I'd think about it. On the walk home, I kept replaying the conversation. It wasn't that I minded talking about dating apps. Honestly, I've had that conversation a million times with friends. But being tricked into thinking I was on a date when I was really just part of someone's data set, that left a bad taste in my mouth. Later that night, he texted thanking me for being so open and saying I'd given him a lot of valuable material. He followed it with, "I think your perspective could make a great chapter." I didn't reply. The next morning, I matched him. I didn't want to risk being followed up with for more quotes. Now, whenever someone sits down for a first date and takes out a notebook, I can't help but wonder if I'm about to end up in a chapter of something. And if I am, I'd at least like to know ahead of time so I can order a more photogenic latte. I met Ava on a Thursday night when I wasn't even planning to be on Tinder. I'd opened the app just to check one message and ended up swiping for half an hour without really meaning to. Her profile came up and stopped me. She had this easy smile that didn't look posed, messy hair that looked intentional, and a photo of her sitting on the hood of an old car drinking a milkshake straight from the metal cup. Her bio just said, "Looking for something simple." I've learned that can mean anything from "I don't want drama" to "I want you to be my entire world" without me saying so, but I figured I'd give it a shot. We matched and she messaged almost right away. She had this laid-back way of chatting that made it feel like we'd known each other for years. No awkward pauses, no trying too hard. By the next morning, we had plans to meet for a late lunch on Saturday. The place she picked was a little corner cafe I had never noticed before. One of those spots that has two outdoor tables and a menu written on a chalkboard. When I got there, she was already sitting outside, sipping iced tea and wearing sunglasses even though it was cloudy. We ordered food and started talking about normal first date stuff. She asked about my work, my hobbies, whether I like dogs. She told me about her job, how she'd moved to the city last year, how she liked exploring new neighborhoods. Everything seemed fine, normal even, until she asked, completely casually, "So, do you have a lot of close friends and family?" I said, "Yeah. I've got a decent circle of both." She tilted her head like she was filing that away. Then she said, "That's usually a deal breaker for me." I thought she was joking. I laughed a little and asked what she meant. She didn't laugh. She said she preferred dating people who didn't have strong family ties or a big friend group. She liked partners who were easier to integrate into her life. I was trying to wrap my head around that. She explained that when someone has too many deep connections already, it's harder for her to fit in or build something that's just ours. She said it made her feel like she was competing for time and attention, and she didn't want that. The way she said it was so matter of fact, like she was talking about preferring one coffee blend over another. She wasn't defensive about it, just, "Sure." I asked if she meant she liked dating people who were more independent. She shook her head. No, it wasn't about independence. It was about availability. She wanted someone whose world she could basically step into and become the center of. I couldn't help but think that sounded like a red flag waving in a strong breeze, but she kept talking like it was totally reasonable. She told me about a past relationship where the guy had a big family and tons of friends. She said it made her feel like an outsider and she hated having to share him with so many people. She told me another story about dating someone who barely had any close connections. She said it was perfect. She could be his go-to person for everything. She smiled when she said that like it was the ideal setup. I sat there nodding slowly, trying not to look as alarmed as I felt. I asked if that ever got exhausting, being someone's entire world. She shook her head and said no, she liked it. She wanted that level of closeness. The more she talked, the more I realized this wasn't a quirk. This was a rule for her. She was screening me. I'd basically failed the test the second I said I had friends and family I was close to. I tried steering the conversation to something lighter, but she kept circling back. She asked how often I saw my friends, how often I talked to my family, if I traveled to see them often. She didn't hide that she thought the answers weren't great for her. At one point she said, "If we were together, I'd probably feel like I was always waiting for you to come back from other people." I didn't know how to respond to that. It was such a strange way to frame normal relationships. Lunch wrapped up and she paid for her half without hesitation. She thanked me for meeting her and said she'd think about whether our lifestyles aligned. It was the politest way I've ever been told someone might not like me because I care about other people. We walked out of the cafe together, and she gave me a quick hug before heading in the opposite direction. I stood there for a second, wondering if I'd misunderstood her or if she really just said all of that without blinking. Later that night, she sent me a short text, "You seem great, but I think we're looking for different things." I didn't argue. Since then, I've told that story to a few friends, and every single one of them has paused at the exact same spot. The part where she said she only dates people without close friends or family. I don't think it's inherently bad to want a really tight connection, but actively avoiding people who have other strong bonds. That's a different kind of preference. Now, whenever someone says, "I'm looking for something that's just ours," I make sure to clarify whether they mean exclusive relationship or cut off from everyone you know, because apparently that can mean two very different things.